I followed the email trail, but I'm curious to hear a little more from you about your situation. And then also, were you referred by local Arizona or no to Lori?
No. Well, yes
Okay.
and no. So I'll start by the referral. Well, the situation, let's start there. Wheel Fund is a 501(c)(3, growing like crazy.
Yeah.
Last year had revenue of about $545,000, uh, which was almost double what it had the year before. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, and from the inception, I, as a old volunteer, have been the development director.
Uh-huh.
So last year we decided to invest in paid staff. We hired an executive director. We hired regional program managers where we have our two biggest regions. One is in Southeast Arizona. The other is up in the Verde Valley of North Central Arizona. And then we also hired a development director. And you may know the person we hired. Her name was Britt Wieland.
Yeah, I
Uh,
do. Yeah.
yeah, and Britt worked for us for about 4 months, and then went to one of her previous companies. Britt was great in coming up with plans, uh, but she wasn't the type of person to knock on doors. And
Hmm.
she came up with a great end of season plan that I executed, and uh, raised about $30,000. So that was nice,
Hmm.
because most of our revenue comes from grants. My
Hmm.
background is I'm a former Fortune 500 executive who's in a sales department. My part of the department was proposals. So I used to joke, if it wasn't $100 million opportunity, I didn't touch it. Uh,
Hmm.
Now I get excited over a 500
I know,
opportunity.
right? Yeah, it's all, yeah.
Yeah. So what we did last year was, uh, I'm not sustainable for us. I'm on Medicare, more runways behind me than ahead of me. So we really wanted to go young with our staff, and we hired 30 and 40 something year olds with our staff. And when Britt stepped down the end of October, I swore I was not going to read another 140 resumes and go through the hiring process again in 2024. And uh, but one of the things she did was she said, "Hey, in the interim, why don't you reach out to some consulting firms?" And one that she recommended was you, Jennifer, and
Yeah,
raised the
that's
bar.
great.
And then, because I am 0 for 2 in core grants with Community Foundation in Southern Arizona, we joined Local First Arizona, because Britt stepped down. I don't have a development director, and Lori, uh, who what got assigned to us just out of grace of God, through that connection. And when I saw that she was connected with Raise the Bar, I said, well, maybe I don't need to read 140 resumes in 2025 either.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
hire somebody who, is really good on the planning side of it, but I need somebody who can execute and knock on doors, and that's what Lori told me that you all specialize in. That you can come up with great plans that we could execute, or you could come up with great plans that you could execute. So that's what brought me here today with you, Jennifer.
Okay. All right. That's great, Kevin. And I thank you for sharing that background. And I did get the information about Brit as well through Lori. I'm glad to hear that Brit, that it was a positive experience for you and that she moved on. I didn't even realize where she landed. So, um, in a former position, we had worked with, she didn't bring us in, but I met Britt through another engagement when she was a development director at St. Luke's Home. So,
Yep, yep, yep.
um,
So that's where we hired her from, but she didn't go back to
yeah.
St. Luke's. She went back to one of her previous employers. They
Mhm.
offered her a job she couldn't say no to, and it was less on the development side and more on the operational side. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
I hated her leaving, but you
Yeah.
know,
But she's a single
you
mom
never you
and,
never stand
all
in
that,
somebody's
right?
way. Yeah, you
I
never stand
know.
in
I know.
somebody's. Yeah.
Isn't it interesting too, having worked in Fortune 500 to sort of be on this side of the world and see how many people work in these jobs at nonprofits, and it's how they make a living. Like it's not their volunteerism, it's yeah. So Kevin, could you tell me a little bit about your fundraising program? Do you write, is it corporate and foundation grants only and then private fundraising? How are you fundraising right now?
We, we are funded primarily through grants. They come from government agencies, primarily cities. Uh, I can't figure out how to get money out of a county in Arizona. We get money from Arizona State Parks and Trails. I am now tipping my toes back into the federal side. When I was at a Fortune 500 company, most of the $100 million opportunities were all federal. So I have a background there in the contracting side, not necessarily in the grant side, but heck, if you can figure out the federal acquisition regulations, there's less regulations for federal grants. So, and I'm not afraid to read the regulations. As a matter of fact, to show you how low the bar is, Jennifer, I was qualified as an expert in federal government contracting in federal court. But that was a
Well, I
decade
know
ago.
I understand. We actually write a lot of government grants as well. So we offer full service support. A lot of times clients will come in one door or another, and it's amazing to me, Kevin, how many organizations still really don't think about the entire picture of their revenue and diversification. The typical nonprofit executive doesn't come from corporate. So they actually, many people really didn't ever learn to run a business. And a
Yeah.
nonprofit is a business really in terms
Yes.
of how you run it, right? Like if you're not bringing in the money, you can't provide the services. It doesn't mean that
Correct.
you have to be a United Healthcare and maximize profit, but you need to know like sound, have sound strategies. And so many organizations, they just sort of rely on the same revenue stream that they've had for years primarily and kind of cross their fingers and hope that the government doesn't cut it or that a big donor doesn't die or something like that, right? But it's not a sustainable strategy.
Right.
Um,
But we also write grants to corporate uh, and foundations. And interestingly, 60% of our 2024 revenue came from outside of Arizona. Uh, because I'll write a grant anywhere and we get significant support from the bike industry. Because I'm
Good.
working to convince them that we're creating customers in training because, we're getting kids on bikes. And so a lot of support from them. Most of our individual, I believe there's four ways to raise money. Uh, Individual donors, businesses, grants, and events. And I found that you can make more hourly flipping burgers at McDonald's than doing events because unless it's a big one, like Angel Charity does, and you have a lot of people to do it, just burns people out. So the idea that what we hired Britt for last year was to develop our individual donors and business sponsorships and to go knock on doors, especially since we could, Southern Arizona, Tucson is considered the bicycle capital of the world. We're getting kids on bikes. We have a great story to tell, but I'm sitting in Sedona. It's kind of hard for me to go knock on doors in Tucson to try to get business sponsors. And we've developed sponsorship packages and things like that for different things. You can sponsor our clubs, you can sponsor our camps, you can sponsor our bike parks that we build. And most of the sponsorships we get for the bike parks are through grants. And then to help us develop more individual donors, because a lot of our kids that participate in our clubs, most of our schools are Title I schools, 70, 80, 90%. We have one school that participate 100% National School Lunch Program participation. It's on the third Mesa and the Hopi Reservation. I'm not going to raise a lot of money from people there, just not. But how do we get more people involved with us in raising funds? So that was the role we were looking for her to do. And what we would be, looking for if we decide to move forward with Raise the Bar, which if I only have to read one proposal rather than 140 resumes,
Right, right. I hear
I'm a
you.
happy
I
man.
understand.
Yeah, that was, I was shocked the amount of resumes that we got for our position when we posted it last summer. Uh, we got them from all over the country. I even got a professional baseball player apply.
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible.
So, Kevin, do you know who your local competition is in terms of just the biking nonprofit community?
Well, the only the competition we have, especially in Southeast Arizona, is El Grupo, which is in downtown, inner city of Tucson. They don't have a replicable, scalable model. Kids have to come to them. We go to where the kids are. We work
I'm
in the
totally
school.
aware. They used to be one of my clients. And
Yeah, they're great.
so there's a lot of things. They don't have a scalable model, but they also a lot of times organizations have a hard time moving past their founders. And then they double down and they bring the founders back, thinking that
Yeah.
somehow it's the founders that are going to keep it going. So yeah, I'm familiar with them, but I wondered if you knew. So that's great. And who
Yeah.
else do you think is in that space?
Uh, the other people that are in the space are the Arizona Interscholastic Cycling League and the Arizona Cycling Association. They're pay to play, so their clientele is more upscale, people with means. They do offer limited scholarships, and interestingly, we offer scholarships to our students, and we let students check if they want to participate with them. We'll pay their way in if they don't have the money, and we'll let them check out our bikes. Uh, one of our alum down in Benson came in second in the AICL state championship riding one of our bikes.
Wow, that's great. How cool. That's a great story.
So there are a couple, but they're going after a whole different clientele than we are.
Sure. And
Other
do they fundraise much?
No,
Yeah,
not
I
really.
wouldn't think so.
Not really. Uh, Other competition are local bike clubs like the Sonoran Desert Mountain Bike
Right.
Association. Uh, but
Yeah.
they they are they fundraise for projects and they're membership based. We work with them to help find coaches. And Old Pueblo Mountain Bike, which is a Facebook group down there that's the largest, but they
Yeah.
don't fundraise. So in terms of cycling, we really don't have much competition other than what I've mentioned. But we also have to compete with every single other nonprofit that's sitting there knocking on doors,
Oh,
with
yeah.
their hat in their hand.
Yeah.
So it's just like in corporate business. You got to come up with a great message, got to have that hook, and you got to offer people a reason to buy into your program, why they want to invest in you.
Right.
It's no different than
Right.
and we run Wheel Fund like a business
Yeah.
because I'm a businessman.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think there are a few other opportunities for revenue. When I work with organizations, I look at fundraising subdivided between individual giving, corporate and foundation. And within individual giving, you have your annual campaign, you have your major gifts, planned giving, and legacy giving. I'm with you on events. Events are typically, they don't have a good ROI. Lots of organizations believe you need to have an event to be visible. I think in this day and age of social media, that's no longer the case. And with the exception of a few, a lot of them are not making the money in return. And especially, I don't know if you notice this, but in nonprofits, we love to we love to try to determine ROI without including what the nonprofit sector calls indirect costs, which means the staff time to do it. It's
Mhm.
crazy. Like you would
Yeah,
never do that in the corporate sector. Be like, oh,
right.
making a profit if you don't include staff. But that's
Yeah.
exactly what nonprofits do, right? So a lot of
And
these,
it
if
does
you
burn out your staff.
right. So
Yeah.
if because there's an opportunity cost, right? Like
Yep.
what could your staff be doing otherwise if they're not doing this event? And it doesn't just burn out the staff, it's the volunteers, it's the board members. So I mean, I'm with you unless you have a really profitable event. And even then, sometimes it's not worth it. Like you mentioned Angel Charities, great event. It's one of those star-studded things.
Yep.
One year they spent $1 million on the event alone.
Oh my goodness.
$1 million to run the event. It's like, okay, I mean, so
And they
yes,
love
I'm
us.
with you.
They love us. We're not
Good.
eligible to apply for them this year because we got a grant from them last year. But
Yeah.
to give you an
Yeah.
idea, when they reached out and said, "Hey, for our gala, uh, we have a member who's given this package that they can a house on the creek in Sedona. Can you help us out?" So I got the best restaurant in town to give them a free dinner with it.
That's
I got
awesome.
a
Yeah.
bike rental, that, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I was playing it forward for 2026 when we're eligible again with them.
So Kevin, just to run through a few other ideas. Of course,
Okay?
the other ways nonprofits raise money is through what we call social entrepreneurship. Um, right. And then, of course, there's fees for service and investment income, right? In addition to the ones that you
Yeah.
mentioned. So, one of the things we're seeing is that organizations that come up through, like the organizations that are about 10 years old or less that really built their model around some level of social entrepreneurism are finding that they're quite sustainable. So, to
What's your definition of
just to
social?
simplify it, social entrepreneurism would be like kind of running a business within the nonprofit to make money to feed the nonprofit, right? I mean, the
Oh,
only
like our
goal
bike
is
skills parts.
so for
Yeah.
example, in Tucson, in addition to those organizations you mentioned, there's a organization called Bicus, and they started, I don't know, they might be coming up on 15, 20 years now. But Bicus was a group of bikers, bicyclists who, in essence, would use reclaimed bicycle parts
Mhm.
to make art and jewelry and things like that,
Yep.
and then sell it, right? And that's some of how they would go about funding themselves. So we've got them, and then we also have the Perimeter Bicycling Association. I don't know if you're familiar with them,
I'm not.
but they're the nonprofit. Okay, they're the nonprofit that runs El Tour de Tucson. And El
Okay.
Tour de Tucson is a huge, this
Yep.
huge annual bicycling event, and I don't know if they converted to being for profit, but they also used to be in the space out here of raising money. And even if they're not, they're very well known in terms of everyone coming together to like have a team that
Mhm.
participates in El Tour, right? So you've got that in this market too.
Yeah.
Um, Pima County per capita has more nonprofits than any other county in the country.
Doesn't
Um,
surprise me because you
there
have
are
money.
30, there are 3,700 registered nonprofits in Pima County alone. Um, so to your point about competition being stiff, the flip side of this market is that it's a mid-sized market. What's happened with corporate giving is that a lot of corporations over the course of the last 20 years have centralized the majority of their giving in their cities of significant operation or their headquarters cities only, which makes a city like Tucson a challenge because on one hand, I can tell you who those companies are,
Yeah.
right? And maybe two hands, but everybody's going after those same companies. That's not to say you shouldn't. But if we were in Seattle or Chicago or New York or Houston, you could keep a fundraiser busy with the big companies. You
Yeah.
can't here. That work is if you're just if you're focused on companies, that's limited. Certainly that's work we can do. But it's going to be pretty clear quick enough if they come in or not, right? There's in essence a finite list.
One
Then there's a
idea
lot of
we had,
small businesses, and the small businesses, in fact, I've been thinking about doing an entire workshop series on this. Where nonprofit fundraisers miss the boat is that small business owners are usually set up as LLCs or sole proprietorships, or their LLCs opting to opt as an S corp, right?
yep,
At the end of the day, what that means is that their gift is a personal donation.
yeah, it's come
They're
out of their
right.
pocket.
I mean, and a lot of times people who come up through charities and charitable work, they don't realize the difference between the corporate sort of entities and the tax structures.
Right.
It's not like you're getting a gift from APS or Unisource or
Yep,
Southwest Gas, where some corporate group of employees is deciding who to give money to, and that just comes from the corporate foundation or profits or whatever, and it doesn't hit the individual. With small businesses, any donation they give is in essence out of the owner's
yep,
pocket at the end of
yep.
the day, unless they're considering it a business expense or a marketing expense and writing it off that way through their business, right? So I think that a lot of times where fundraisers go wrong is that, or that where organizations go wrong, is that they apply to all of those small businesses as if they are TEP or Geico,
No,
right? And it's sort of laughable, right? So I think that, if you were looking at really trying to pursue small businesses, that's also doable, but a different approach is necessary. More that kind of aligns more like an individual giving approach. I love
yeah.
that you've got sponsorships. People can wrap their arms around that. But I'm curious, what is your goal? Like, what's your financial goal in,
Well, I'd like to get, uh, right now we're 80% grants, 12% uh, individual donors, and 8% businesses. Now, it doesn't reflect that because sometimes, it comes in as a corporate contribution, but I have to write a grant to get it. It's not where
right?
I'm
I know. Yeah.
for. And
Yep.
I would like to get uh, our reliance on grants from 80% down to about 60%, with the rest going out to individuals and to businesses. And one thing that we haven't touched, Jennifer, is parents at the schools. There are parents at the schools that own businesses or decision makers in businesses that we have not, as an organization, reached out to, tapped into, because think about it, they want to invest in their kids, and it would be a lot easier sell than going to Domino's Pizza or something, to get something. But we just don't have the bandwidth to go do that two ways. One, I can go knock on 100 doors, or I can write one grant and probably get more money than knocking on 100 doors. And it's
Absolutely.
kind of hard for me to drive 4 hours to go knock on doors.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, Kevin, do you have in your mind a dollar amount for what you would want, to see raised from an engagement? Like, and whether that's from individuals or, businesses, foundations, what have you.
Oh, I'd like to get, from an engagement out of businesses, a good 50 to $75,000 as a start. Individuals, probably half of that, and I'm talking incremental over what we're getting, right now. That's what I would be looking for, and that would help me to invest, because eventually I have to invest in a development director, Jennifer. Uh, I'm a volunteer. I do it because I have passion for the kids and passion for the mission, and I created this thing.
Yeah.
But I'm not, like I said, there's more runway behind me than ahead of me, and I see the importance of what we're doing, especially in rural Arizona, where
Yeah.
you know
I
the,
agree
oh,
110%, Kevin.
the
It is
things that I
shocking.
see, uh, and so and I what I have to do in the next couple of years is to get this operating from a personality of one to a business operating, uh, and building, that type of revenue base. The executive director that we hired, he's really good at knocking on doors to getting more schools, but he doesn't have the business background that I have. So eventually, I'm going to have to bring in a development director that can replicate what I am doing, uh, and build a staff to go do it. But in the interim, please save me from reading 140 resumes.
Happy to help you. I'd love if you're willing to share your budget. I shouldn't say
Yeah,
your budget, your actuals, your
yeah.
actuals, so that I can see how your revenue breaks down. That
Mhm.
will help me to have a deeper conversation with you about what I see and what I think we can do.
Okay.
Um, because once I know your baselines, I can help you figure out,
Okay.
where I think you're going to be able to grow your revenue the fastest.
Okay. Do you have a standard
And
non-disclosure you like uh, to sign? You know, it just goes back to my business background before I hand out financials. Uh, uh, do you have one that you like that you could send to me? I don't really have one. I'm usually working on a position of trust, and heck, in 2 months it's going to be public anyhow when we file our 990. So I'm not terribly worried, but
oh, I mean, I keep all that confidential, but if it is helpful to you, I mean,
no, I mean, if you look me
I
in the eye
can
and
do.
say, I'm not gonna disclose it until you disclose it, that's good enough for
Well,
me.
no, I have, I mean, it's so rare that people ask us that, but I do have an NDA that I've used on occasion. I have to dust it off.
No, don't
And
worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's gonna be public in 2 months anyhow when we file our 990, so it's,
yeah, and really what I want to get a sense of is how much comes in from individuals, how much comes in from companies, how much comes in from foundations. Because, I've been in this business for a lot of my career. But my husband and I own two businesses, and we also are real estate investors. So I actually understand, a bit of the for-profit side as
yeah,
well, and I don't run Raise the Bar as a nonprofit, but what I do know, I'm a geek for details and keeping track of, like what's current in management, leadership, um, um, sort of revenue trends.
okay,
I'm
good.
right. I really focus on, I keep up with success, impact, et cetera. And I know what you can expect to see in terms of growth year over year, depending on where your program is. And that's really why I'm asking the question. If you want to redact information in terms of who gave the money, that's fine. But I
Yeah, my,
really
my
want to get a
financials
sense
won't
of,
go that deep. They'll
yeah,
just, it'll be individual donations, corporate
yeah,
donations,
yeah,
and then it'll be grants and foundation and investment income.
yeah.
That's that. You also want to see expenses, or you just want to see the revenue side?
I just want to see the revenue side. And then,
Okay,
if it's easier for you to just send me everything because it's already in one P&L, that's fine. I mean, I don't want you to have to do a lot of work. Um, but then I'm also curious about like how many total donors do you have and how many of those people are giving more than $1,000 a year?
total donors. Now you're talking individual donors.
Yep.
Okay, donors.
Total number. And those would be people who've given like in the last 3 years or so, right? Like not someone who made a gift 10 years ago or bought a raffle ticket and hasn't done anything since.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Active donors. How many of those people give $1,000 or more annually?
Okay,
And then also, if you could give me some sort of sense of your fundraising activities on an annual basis. In essence, how frequently how many appeals do you do? How many requests for money? And what are the channels of those appeals? So are you sending mailings, email, text, the combination? I kind of want to get a sense of that picture of what it is you're
Okay.
doing. And it's okay if you say, actually, we're not doing this thing. That's very helpful for me to know.
Yeah.
Because in a nutshell, Kevin, and it's probably not unlike what you've seen in other areas, um, if you have um, if you have warm leads and if you have um, an interested audience, but you have not been um, activating them, you're gonna see faster growth amongst that group.
Mhm.
Then you will see in what we call um, acquisition or leads generation kinds of strategies, right? Very similar to corporate. You're
Yeah.
going to see that prospecting acquisition work is, if it breaks even, you're winning. It's sometimes a loss leader because what you're trying to do is grow the value of someone's giving over the course of time, right? And you need to do some of that to replenish donors who leave. Um,
Mhm.
but then once all those groups are really activated and they're giving at their potential, then we see a bit of a plateauing and more of a traditional growth pattern. And national average is that when an organization is doing well with fundraising, they're increasing their giving year over year by about 5%. So before that, that's when you can really see those, 10 to 50% kinds of growth patterns. And it can be easy for boards to think that's always going to happen. Like, oh, great, every year we can increase our revenue by 30%. That's not really how it works. But I know that you understand these things, which is why I'm delving into the
Yeah, yeah,
detail. But
I have to explain to my board why we're not going to double our revenue in 2025 like we did in 2024.
right. So, I want to know enough about it so I can say,
Okay.
hey, I think $50,000 is totally doable in this category. Or, you know what, Kevin, I think you're looking at 20 here, but you could probably do 100 here, and that's not
Okay,
on your radar.
that's fair.
That's the kind of thing I want to get a sense of so that I can submit a proposal to you. We can discuss what the best strategy is and then help you move forward. I can tell you that in a lot of these communities, the private foundations are a disproportionate amount of money for a lot of organizations. That's not necessarily a bad thing. They're run by individuals largely. It was the mechanism that a family set up for their philanthropy. But there's a lot of small foundations, and there's a lot of people that have donor advised funds these days. So that
Yeah.
those two areas can really be very lucrative for organizations throughout, especially in Southern Arizona in this market. And then I think you've got some real opportunity to grow funding from individuals, like you said. And
Speaking of DAFs, two of our major donors are donating through DAFs, which I prefer because uh, I worry about tipping. Uh, are you familiar with that?
tipping.
Uh-huh. When we,
Well, I
you know,
probably am, but I don't know if I've ever heard the terminology.
uh, if I get $100,000 donation from an individual,
Yep.
everything over 2% of that is what's called bad. It doesn't count in the numerator, but it counts in the denominator to get your public support. But if I can get that same donor to hand me $100,000 through a DAF, now it's coming from a foundation
Oh, I
and
understand
not
what
the
you're
individual.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're
So
you're
I'm
talking about the like being a disproportionate donor and perhaps affecting um
yeah, yeah,
I know
the
some
fundraise
organizations get
thing.
concerned about whether it's going to affect their nonprofit status,
Yeah.
and it rarely does. I mean, those laws are pretty much in place to to get folks who are intentionally self-dealing and things like that. But
Right.
I do understand what you're saying. So a lot of people who have a certain level of financial wealth or philanthropic savvy set up a DAF anyway. And the devil's in the details. So then you find out that the gift is going to be come through a DAF, or you can have that conversation as part of a solicitation. Kevin, are you doing much fundraising in the Sedona area for your programs?
Yes, yes and no. I'm doing a lot of networking uh, through the Arizona Community Foundation of Sedona and the Arizona Community Foundation of Yavapai County. But knocking on doors, not so much. I have a few, small corporate sponsors up here, but that's it. Most of our corporate sponsorship, and I'll put this all in the email I send you, Jennifer, is coming from uh, give you an example, Arizona Complete Health. That's money coming from the Centene Corporation. Uh,
Yep.
I wrote a grant application to them in 2023 that Anthony Mancini from there calls me up and goes, I want to make sure you're not a Nigerian prince because uh, nobody does what you say you do. And so I had to slap up the Flagstaff and go meet him. And then I started to working the relationship and working the relationship. And I turned $10,000 in 2023 into $65,000 into 2024. And I'm having lunch for breakfast with Anthony here in a couple of weeks that who knows what I'm going to turn it into to 2025. And that's one of the things that we do,
Yep.
Jennifer, is we work relationships with these foundations and businesses
Exactly.
that sponsor, and that's a lot of my time working that relationship with them, under promising, over delivering, communicating with them, not waiting until it's time for a report so that they hear from
Yep.
us.
You're
All
you're
of those
speaking my
things,
language, Kevin.
I mean, all of those things I do because that's what we used to do in the for-profit world. And we would do that with, smaller uh, business sponsors too, but it's, I just don't have, like I said a couple times, I just don't have the bandwidth to go knock on doors. I can go find an opportunity, write a grant that wows them, and then over deliver. And the next thing you know, they're a supporter for years.
Yeah, I'm glad you're doing that because I can't tell you how many clients we work with where we're getting the money for them and nobody follows up.
Oh, oh,
Nobody
oh,
follows up with relationship building, because we do that work when people pay us to, but if they think their staff is going to do it and they just want us to write the proposal, okay. But I can't tell you how many, they cash the check and they move on to the next thing. And there's not that relationship building. And one
I
other
have
thing that,
I have a
we
relationship.
see, it's
I have a
critical.
relationship with every one of our major funders that I have developed and worked, and uh, and that's just part and parcel to what I do every day. Um,
And, Kevin, that really, I hear what you say about your executive. What we've seen, especially in the last decade, is that relationship cultivation, building, and stewardship of donors, of big donors, needs to be at that executive level.
it
The one
does,
of the
yeah.
challenges you're going to see, one of the challenges you're going to see is that a lot of development directors, they can't get the door open beyond the regional manager or
Right.
someone under who you're talking with. You know what I mean? Some people can, but the CEO in the room really makes a difference. If there's ever an opportunity for you to be bringing your executive along with you to some of these meetings and engagements and
Oh, I
everything,
do. Oh,
I
I
think,
do.
oh, good.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm grooming him to take it over.
Oh,
But
good.
right now, it's we are in such. He is just inundated because schools have discovered us, and now he's
Yeah.
going. I mean, we're going to grow by 14 schools this year, which is big for us. Uh, and
It
Uh,
is.
it's
So is he meeting with the leaders of those schools? I heard you say you have program directors.
Well, yeah, so what he's doing is our two program managers are meeting in the schools in their regions. So I have a Marana-based program manager who's doing the school development in new schools in our southeast region, which is basically the same southeast region of Community Foundation of South Arizona, south of the Gila River, east of Santa Cruz River, for Pinal and Pima counties. Uh, and and then I have a regional program manager doing the same thing here in our North Central region. Our executive director is doing that in our Northwest region, our Northeast region, our Southwest region, our South Central, where I don't have staff. He is doing that.
Got it. Got
And
it.
so right now I got him focused on, all right, let's make sure we're delivering quality product to the schools. I'll make
Mhm.
sure we're delivering quality product to our supporters. And eventually, that rapid growth is going to slow down. And when that slows down, that's when I'm going to transition him into more of doing all the other things that I would expect an executive director to do. And so, like, Jeff, I don't get involved in that operational type things
Yeah.
uh, because that's
Yeah.
his. Uh,
Yeah.
but I do bring him every chance I can get to meeting with our major donors and our major supporters, so that they all know that, hey, when this gray-headed old man steps down, this is the guy you're going to be dealing with.
Mhm. All right. I think I have a solid sense of
Okay,
everything. That
great.
was very helpful. It was very helpful for
Well,
me
thanks for giving
to
me more than the 20 minutes that we scheduled.
understand. You're welcome. I book in 20-minute increments because I find that if it's not a fit, we can wrap up quickly, and or if it's someone trying to sell me something, or or if but I always make time for it to go over. But I decided a long time ago I'm not doing hour long anymore because people will take the free hour, you know what I mean? And it's like I got to
Yep,
move on. So thank you for taking the time
my
to
pleasure.
Kevin. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and
Likewise, Jennifer.
we'd love to work with you if it ends up being a fit and it feels
Yeah,
right for you. um so next
okay,
steps on my end are just to get that information from you, and
okay,
then I could take a look at it, think through your program right now, and what might be the best use um, of your dollars, as we move forward and we think about, that return you want on the investment of working collaboratively with us too. Does
awesome,
that
awesome.
work for you?
It does. Well,
Okay.
with a little bit of luck, I'll have everything you asked for you today. Because interestingly, I just had to do a grant where I had to list all of my contributors for the last 2 years. Boom, I have that. I'm also our treasurer, so QuickBook Online. Okay, let's get the financials. Boom,
Okay.
I'm cook,
Great.
baker, and candlestick maker here. So great.
Yeah.
All right, well, Jennifer, it was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Pleasure meeting you too. And I'm looking forward to keeping the conversation going here.
Likewise. Take care,
All right.
Jennifer.
Thanks,
Bye bye.
Kevin. Bye bye.